This is the ArtWorks Alliance podcast. ArtWorks Alliance promotes better participatory arts, encompassing all art forms, ways of working, settings, and art purposes. Find out more at artworksalliance.uk. Hello, this is the ArtWorks Alliance podcast. That's the first effort at creating a podcast for the ArtWorks Alliance, where we can discuss participative arts. And ArtWorks Alliance is artworksalliance.uk. And today we're joined by, each week we have a lunchtime meet up online and just a conversation. We thought, wouldn't it be great to have these conversations and turn them into a podcast? So that's what we're going to try and do. And this is the first time we've done it, and we'll get better and improve it as we go along. But today we're joined by Jade Sturrock and Bill Taylor-Beales, and I'll get them to introduce themselves now, actually. So who wants to go? Jade, you go first.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. So my name's Jade. I work for an organisation called Glasgow Connected Arts Network, and we are a network of about 600 artists and small grassroots organisations working across Glasgow. We really started off as quite a grassroots organisation ourselves, supporting participatory artists. And over the past few years, the network has just grown and grown. So now we have really diverse members from music to theatre to circus arts and everything in between. So that's my kind of part-time gig. And then on top of that, I'm also a participatory artist. And I work freelance, mostly with visual arts. So yeah, lots of different types of work with kids and refugees and all sorts of different things.
Wonderful.
Bill, what about you?
Hi, so I'm Bill Taylor-Beales. I'm based here in Llanelli and South Wales, and I'm a creative practitioner, so have been for a very long time. I once ran my own community arts charity for 10 years in Cardiff, where we spent a lot of time working with community groups, working in prisons, schools, hospices, all sorts of places. My skill base, my disciplines are filmmaking, animation, visual art, sculpture, a bit of storytelling, bit of music as well. I'm quite greedy. I've been around for a while and kind of grabbed bits and pieces along the way. But my main kind of interest is how we use the creative arts in the mental health and well-being arena, and also in education. Those are my two kind of prime areas of working.
Let's start off with working definition of what participatory arts means to you. Jade, how have you got involved in this, and what do you get out of it?
That could be a very, very long answer, but basically, to try and summarise, it's art which gets everyone involved. So really at the root of it, it's about getting people to participate rather than just be a kind of passive audience member, or art kind of happens to them. So it's kind of for the people, by the people, I would say.
Bill?
Well, absolutely. I'm not sure I can improve on that definition at all, other than to say that whenever I start a project with a group of people, I make sure that it's understood that I want to be a better artist at the end of the project. I'm not here to say, this is how you do it. I'm here to say, how shall we do this? And I'm happy to put all my skills and experience on the table, but expect everybody else to do the same thing. And together we'll find a new creative path to do whatever the project is.
So we've got a topic for conversation, which has come out of some previous conversations Bill and I have had over the last couple of weeks, which have been really fascinating. And this is part of the idea of developing a podcast to make it more participative. When I answered exactly the same, I tend to come from a media background, so it's about the idea of getting people involved and participating in the construction and development and distribution and sharing of their own media, rather than, as you say, letting other people do it. So there's an affinity there, I think, with arts practice and media practice, almost to the point where you can't tell the difference sometimes, nor should you. So the idea is thinking about participatory arts comes from a particular tradition of arts, but it's also being recognised as something which is these things come and go. There's waves of models that funding organisations use, for example, and things like co-production and critical thinking are somewhere in the mix of this. And sometimes the volume on those things are turned up, and sometimes the volume gets turned down. But Bill, you've talked about positive disruption. Do you want to tell us about the projects that you've worked on and are working on that use a model of positive disruption and what that means?
Yeah, I mean, the phrase positive disruption, used by many people in different arenas, the one that I'm using it for is that no matter who we are or our best intentions, when we're in with other people, we will disrupt ways of thinking, ways of doing, ways of being. And ideally, our disruption is a positive thing, is a positive element that spreads positive ripples throughout the environment that we're working in. And hopefully those ripples come back and kind of positively disrupt me as well on the way back, kind of thing. So there's a kind of echo thing going on there. Particularly when we think about teachers and their role in a class as being a positive disruptor. And obviously their influence on some very young minds eager to kind of learn and absorb is huge responsibility. So whenever I'm working in schools, I'm very aware that everything I do, how I present, what I say, how I act, when I laugh, when I'm not, is a disruption into them. And they're kind of absorbing that profile. And so again, working with the mental health arena, very much being aware of everybody has triggers at different levels. And so how can we kind of be positive disruptors in there, allowing that awareness to be something that can be shared in a group setting and find confidence and security in that area as well. So everything we do is saying, even if I just cough, if I sneeze, if I say hello, if I don't use this, I'm making an effect. You know, it's that whole kind of butterfly wing effect that kind of affects everything further on down the line. And then not to be too paranoid about that, because if you start going down that line, I think, well, that's a very scary thing to do. But being in the classroom, and I've been in the classroom for many years now, feeling and being aware of the class is kind of the biggest thing for me. And I spend a lot of time before I do any creative activity is just being aware of who's in the room, how are they responding? And I have lots of ice-breaking kind of processes to find out who's there, what's going on, the personalities, the abilities, where the triggers might be, before we go into any kind of creative adventure together, just to see who's in the room. So we're all very happy with each other in the room. So I'm going to pause there because I could spend the rest of the hours talking about that.
Jade, how does that fit with your experience?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something in there about kind of shared authorship. So I think as a creative going into a space, whether it's a school or a community centre or any kinds of space where you're working with all different types of people, it's about kind of leaving your ego at the door in terms of your own creative practice and realizing that whatever you make, you're coming to make it together, and it has to fulfill the objectives of all the people that you're working with and not just your own objectives. I think it's really interesting what you're saying about disruptions, because I think participatory creative processes are really powerful for allowing people to talk about their own experiences in a non-judgmental kind of supportive environment. And I think there's something in there about kind of brave spaces versus safe spaces. There's a lot of chat about safe spaces, which I think do have a really important place in terms of safeguarding participants that you're working with. But I think there's a lot of value in exploring difficult topics and exploring trauma and empowering people to get their experiences across. And kind of you are almost the person teasing that out rather than the one authoring it, I would say.
What would you think of then as a I mean, in a classroom situation, typically, Bill, you go in with a lesson plan. I mean, maybe I'm out of touch with this. It's a while since I've done it, but you go in with a set of objectives, and I think that for me, the lesson plan is the thing that has killed education. Today, you're going to learn this, and this is how you're going to learn it. That's not learning to me. Learning is a process of kind of unfolding and discovery and challenge. Is this disruptive process? Is that something that is... How do you model that within that experience so that people feel confident that it's not just a random free-for-all, if you like, or people are just left to fend for themselves?
Yeah. It's one of the things which is the most terrifying things for teachers who are bound by lesson plans and kind of ways to quantify that day. So at the end of the day, they can say such and such has happened, and this is a report, and this is the marks out of 10 for that. It's quantifying it. Whereas I come in and say quite freely, I have no idea where we will end up today, and that is the absolute joy of it. That we're going to go on a journey together, and we're going to experience and share together on that journey. And it's not to be marked. Is the big thing in schools. We're not marking this. There isn't a kind of 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, because there's no wrong or right. We want to become explorers, and we want to do that together. So we want to respect each other and explore together. And I mean, that was one of the things that was heartbreaking when I was working in a high school, was that I spent this time doing this lesson, and a pupil put their hand up and said, "But how are we going to be marked on this?" And I said, well, there's no marking. There's no marking. There's no wrong or right with this. They said, well, why should we bother? Because the mindset was so entrenched that they have to learn something, get it right, and 6 months down the line, they'll be tested on it. And that's what happens at school, as opposed to being this creative, and to quote the late Sir Ken Robinson, do schools kill creativity? Yes. It's a heartbreaking thing, but that's the thing. He says, as they go through school, they get taught first the whole body, then the top half of the body, then just the head, and then just the left side kind of thing. Do you mean it's just about academicness rather than being these creative explorers, these self-learners. Self-learners is the key kind of word here. We want young people to find their own way through the education system and to be excited by it. And so that's the big thing that I kind of set out from ground up. There is no lesson plan for this. Sure, I've got a box of tricks I can bring in with me, and we do lots of ice-breaking games. Games is a huge thing that we do, just playing games, enjoying each other's company, finding out about each other. Because a lot of the time, in the reports from the projects I do, one of the big things that comes out from the pupils is that they say, I never knew this about the other person. And so getting to know each other was a huge part of that, because getting to know each other then builds respect. And that respect then builds that kind of inbuilt security and confidence to be more yourself and to kind of take those risks. So
your experience then, Jade, in the work, the context of the community type engagement things that you do, is that outside of the school system? Do you deal with people who have gone through that very rigid model of education of just feeding the left brain?
Yeah, I definitely see it from the other side as well. I love Ken Robinson as well. There's a great video on YouTube, actually, changing education paradigms, and there's like an illustration to go along with it, and it talks about the factory model and how you kind of go in, there's this bell, rigorous testing, and it's not really like a one-size-fits-all solution, especially with my work with young people. So I've done quite a lot of work with care experience young people who maybe feel kind of marginalised by their situations or the systems that they find themselves in and kind of left behind. And the amount of young people that I work with that go, oh, well, I'm rubbish at art, I don't know how to draw. And like at the beginning, they don't even want to maybe engage with the process. But once they realise that they can design the process themselves and explore what they want to explore, they just bloom and they flourish, and everything, all the possibilities open up for them. I remember working with one young man who he talked about always getting into trouble, going around on his BMX and getting into trouble, and like people just thought he was a nuisance and everything. And we're like, well, why don't you make some paintings like using your bike? And we went outside, and just there was no rules to that kind of making process. And I think also in terms of kind of evaluation, like how do you measure if something's good and impactful? That can also be participatory. So in the past, I've maybe worked with young people to design, well, what is our measures of success? Like, what would you say they are, rather than them being grades or, how you're marked. So it's quite an interesting, it's almost like flipping everything on its head. And then he's like, no, I am good at art. I am good at art. And we're like, of course. But it's just not being recognised maybe within that system.
That element you brought something up, which is the process of evaluation. It kind of hangs over everything that we do in a formal sense.
Yeah.
How do you know what is your rule of thumb? What has taught you to tune into that tells you that this has been a good session? That it's and it is something that you can't sometimes account for. Sometimes how do you write down on a piece of paper? Well, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up at the moment when the learning took place. How do you account for that tangible and intangible markers of engagement and success?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, especially when you're working to someone else's evaluation framework as well, like a funder's or a partner or whatever. But I think what really helps for me is kind of like doing it in the moment. So maybe keeping like a little notebook to write down comments, and so that the kind of evaluation process isn't too invasive and that it's part of the process. So like doing kind of evaluation forms with teenagers where they've got to write down stuff or like grade things on a scale of 1 to 10 sometimes isn't the best way to do that. Rather, you could get like an evaluation, like in the past I've done an evaluation tree where they draw their response or they write stuff and they stick it as like a leaf to this tree, and that feels like it's just naturally part of the workshop and it's not too kind of jarring. I think as well it's quite difficult for us as practitioners to, like, sometimes the outcomes are very, very long term, and it's something, you might notice someone's confidence increasing over a period of months or even years rather than over the space of maybe a 3-month project. So it's kind of worth bearing in mind to have indicators that are realistic. And I think funders need to be reminded of that as well. It's not this kind of like go in, fix the community, quote unquote, and then go back out. It's a long-term investment that we need to see.
And that's really hard to get that information back. I worked in Park Prison here for about 3 years with young offenders. And what was really nice was that towards the end of our project time, we had the feedback that the young offenders had really engaged better with their education process that they were doing because of the creative stuff that we've been doing. And the words that were being used was ambition. And we changed the ambition. Whereas before they just kind of saw that was their identity. By positively disrupting and bringing in these creative processes and just having a really good time and enjoying the process with them, we raised ambitions, we raised aspirations of who they could be, who they might be. And I think one of the big things was that, and I guess it's a heartbreaking thing as well, that we did some very, very basic things. We took in little silver jewels, sticky back jewel things on pieces of paper that we were using for the artwork. And there was one moment where we just looked around the room and there's all these kind of teenage boys who are just very carefully sticking these little jewels to their trainers, and really enjoying playing, the sort of thing they might have done when they were 12 or 8, but they'd never done that when they're 12 or 8. And together as a group, they just loved playing. And that kind of going back and kind of going through, just enjoying play, enjoying being creative without kind of worrying about it, was that the change was that they had more value in themselves to kind of just enjoy being themselves. And that kind of was a knock-on effect throughout the rest of the kind of their time there. So that when they came out, they had these ambitions and aspirations which maybe weren't there before.
I suppose the context and the framework. Jade, you're in Scotland. Bill, you're in Wales. I'm in England. And the education system seems to. I was a school governor of primary school back 2010, 2011. I got out just before, and Michael Gove took over. And the change that you've seen is very much more super focus. Incredible tight focus on discipline, on rules, on appearance. Very narrow and prescriptive model. And why does education have to be? We've got this kind of messianic Protestant work ethic when it comes to education in England. I don't know what it's like in Scotland and Wales, which is that it should be hard and it should be difficult, and you work like there's this kind of work ethic that's supposed to be applied to learning, which is that it's difficult and it's demanded and you need to be trained for it. It's almost like a kind of the Greeks and the Spartans. It's kind of very. Is this kind of something's gone on that is this process-driven thing of monitoring everything, and and learning. That's not the best way to learn. The best way to learn, in my experience, is when you're having fun. I mean, not fun for the sense of there's a joy that comes from being immersed in a topic or a subject or an activity that you just go with the flow of that, and you bring out that flow of learning. Rather than it being something which is you're forced or you're expected to do, that regulates. And I'm not saying everything should be anarchic in that sense or pandering to play and fun, but there's a more of an emphasis, I think, on loosening up some of these things and providing some space. Is that something is my perception coloured by what I'm reading in the media? Is my perception something that's an English thing? How does it differ with Scotland and Wales, do you think?
I think I know that in Wales we have just introduced the creative curriculum, the Donaldson curriculum, where the four purposes are ambitious, capable learners, ethically informed citizens, enterprising creative contributors, and healthy, confident individuals. None of that is talking about English or maths or science. It's just about being really well-rounded, healthy young people who want to go out and explore the world. And I think I'm right in saying that Scotland had a creative curriculum ahead of us all. I think Scotland is kind of leading the way as far as that kind of curriculum approach.
Yes and no. So I think we get the kind of trickle down effect of this focus on STEM, science, maths. I think at the moment there seems to be a lot of chat around productivity and sustainability and how to turn creativity into really something that's quite money driven. Unfortunately, because I don't think creative processes or participatory processes, that's not really their purpose. Sometimes it can be a positive byproduct. So if someone, becomes empowered and then manages to start their own creative social enterprise and then runs a business, that's brilliant. But that's not really at the heart of why we're doing this. We're doing this to encourage autonomy, confidence, ambition, as you said. So I think there is a focus on creativity, but it's still within quite an oppressive system, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that particularly, I with the Arts Council of Wales, I operate within the Lead Creative Schools system, where we kind of are getting artists in to work alongside schools, which is wonderful in the primary sector, really very difficult in the high schools. Because their timetabling is so rigid and their kind of structure is so rigid. Whereas primary schools, we can take the whole day off, the whole week off, and kind of change curriculum subjects. So I'm very hopeful for the primary schools. I'm still holding my breath for the high schools. I think there's a lot of work still needs to be done in completely turning that very big ship around.
And a lot of it's to do with resource as well. Like, I've been into some schools where they've got brilliant teachers, lots of helpers, like lots of funding to be able to do this kind of thing. Other schools where they just don't, like, the teachers are stretched and they struggle. So yeah, I think it's systemic. Sometimes it's not that people don't have the will to do it or they don't see the benefit in it. It's just that they can't do it. And I think there needs to be more support.
Yeah, I think that's something that we spoke about last week, was the word permission. And I use the word permission because going into the school with the projects that I do with the Arts Council of Wales, there is finances there for people to step off the treadmill for a bit, to press pause and have permission to explore different things. And we were talking about whether that word should be more inspiration, as far as kind of inspiring people to do that move, regardless of whether there was a funding coming in or something. But, teachers' roles are so prescriptive, and it's very hard for them to come off that wheel and kind of do that. So hopefully these projects set an example of this is how it could work. This is a version where it could work, where you do this. And it's not about an add-on. We're not adding on something extra to the curriculum. This is about doing it differently. We talk about doing a maths project using animation instead of that. And, those things, I remember the day we did this in one primary school, and me and the teacher, we just stood back and we generally said, we could walk out of the room right now and not be here for the next hour, and this would just carry on, because they were so involved. They were so excited about making clay models and doing animation and working as a small team. Do you mean they had become self-learners? And the fact that it was a maths lesson was completely beside the point. That was just kind of the subject was for doing it. But finding that energy, finding that kind of space to say there are different ways, there are different approaches, but you need to step off it and give permission or inspiration to do that.
That I like the phrase auto-catalytic. That idea that it's self-generating and participative media or arts practices, finding that point where you kickstart that engine and it just, what is the catalyst for that allows something to generate itself and to continue going. That's kind of the elixir. Jade, what would your recommendations be for other people within the ArtWorks Alliance network in terms of coming forward and being confident about inspiring others? Because I think that is a word that Bill's right. Well, we kind of feel a bit kind of cautious about using that. Are we in the business of inspiring people? It's actually, I feel I'm not in the business of giving people permission to do anything. And I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that I might ever inspire something, because, my self-esteem is not built in that way. But, actually that's the kind of approach that we maybe need to take, isn't it? What would you recommend to other members of our network that might kind of think about it? Go, let's be more competent about that.
Yeah, I think kind of a recognition that you are playing a part in something bigger, that you are there to really kind of to guide people rather than in a traditional kind of teaching sense. You're not there to tell them exactly what to do or how to do it, but you're there to kind of pull ideas and suggest and kind of build a pathway, really. And that's a whole kind of mindset. I remember reading a book by Philippa Perry. It's like all the things that I wish my parents had done, or I can't remember the exact title, but that talks about, like, I guess it's an interesting methodology of kind of encouraging young people or whoever you're working with to kind of think through ideas for themselves rather than defining them. And you'll find that through doing that, you kind of get all the evidence. And I think having a kind of bank of evidence and kind of stats and like the positives of this kind of work is really empowering for people to have. And then they can kind of go to funders and be like, well, we know this works. So, give us money for it. Because I think that is the hardest thing as well, is resourcing the work that you're doing. But if you've got knowledge and evidence that it works, then it's great.
Bill, what's your inspiring message?
Well, I think that, relationship is a big thing. I think where this isn't going to happen overnight. It is a relationship thing. And I've been in a relationship with a local health board now for a few years, and we're gaining confidence in each other as the artists and the kind of the people who are working in the system to understand each other and be participatory in that, and to understand, as you say, getting that evidence back, not after the first week or month, but after a couple of years, and saying, yeah, that has really worked. Those seeds that were planted have really grown because it's been continued to be nurtured. And I think the thing that I always ask myself is, am I the biggest learner in the room? If I'm modeling being a self-learner, I need to be the learner. I need to be showing what it is to be going, I'm inspired by that. I'm intrigued by that. I wanted to find out about this. How do I do this? And, I should be doing that rather than saying, this is how you do it. This is what you should be doing, So am I the biggest learner in the room? Keep asking yourself that question. And, I think fruit will come from that.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're running out of time. The last thing I always ask is, how can people get in contact with you? Jade, what's the best way for anybody to follow up, to contact you?
Yeah, so if anyone's interested in the network, the best way, so my email address there is just jade@glasgowcan.org, and we're also www.glasgowcan.org. If you're interested in my work as a freelancer, my website is just jadesturrock.com.
Bill, yourself.
Probably the easiest thing is my website, which is Hushland, Hushland, hushlandcreative.com, hushlandcreative.com, and all the stuff's on there.
And ArtWorks Alliance is a members-based organisation, so you can join us, and it's artworksalliance.uk. I should have had this up a moment ago. I'll get our Twitter or X address, whatever it's called these days, is ArtWorks Alliance. So you should be able to find us, and it's info@artworksalliance.uk if you are able to contact us. So that's been fantastic. I think that's a really great start, and we've got off the ground, and hopefully we'll have many more of these conversations, and hopefully they'll inspire other people to connect and come and chat about these things as well. So until next time, thanks very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks so much for having us.
You've been listening to the ArtWorks Alliance podcast. Find out more at artworksalliance.uk.